I'm here with Dag Kittlaus. Dag, how are you today?
I am great. Thanks
Th-
for asking.
thanks for being here. So I'm going to start way back. At Stanford, you worked as an entrepreneur in residence, and there was some technology there that they didn't quite know what to do with. What was it, and what happened next in terms of forming a business?
Yeah, interestingly, at that time, just before I went to Stanford, I was working at Motorola, and I decided to leave Motorola. I happened to have dinner with the CEO of Stanford Research and told him I was leaving, and he said, "What are you doing next?" And I said, "Oh, I'm interviewing for a few things." But he said, "Hey, look, come out west, become an entrepreneur in residence, come and look at our technology." And for those of you that don't know, Stanford Research, they have like 2,000 researchers. It's one of the top research organizations in the world. They have all sorts of technologies, but the one that I resonated with was artificial intelligence, where it was very close to being able to be commercialized, where you could essentially talk to a computer, have it understand what you're trying to do, and help you get it done. And in those early days, it actually wasn't about the phone yet, and it was more like a search engine that you could type commands into more than just the voice part. But yeah, so we looked at that and ultimately decided to that it was ready, and kind of spent a few hundred hours sitting in a lazy boy chair just outside Chicago before I made the move, coming up with this sort of idea around what Siri actually is, and looking for a name and so on and so forth. And that was sort of how I was born. So that would be late 2007, early 2008.
What were the first questions being asked of Siri or the computer at that time? And was it called Siri originally, or did you come up with that name? And what does it mean?
Yeah, so I originally named it Hal after the
Oh,
Space Odyssey, 2001: A Space
uh huh.
Odyssey character, because that was sort of the idea, what Hal was doing, minus the murderous intent of the artificial intelligence. Yeah, I found the name Siri, and I'm Norwegian, and Siri is actually in Norwegian means beautiful woman that leads you to victory. So yeah, we decided to go with that name, and the first use cases and the idea of what Siri was going to do was sort of the next paradigm beyond search. And if you look at the internet, every 10 years or so, a new paradigm comes around. So you started with Yahoo and the ability to look at indexes and kind of just navigate, you know, in a very early way through the internet. And then search came along and changed all that. But search is really, keywords and finding web pages that contain those words. But Siri was about the next generation. What comes after that that makes it even easier to navigate the web, to get things done, and ultimately landed on that something called a virtual personal assistant. And the idea there is that you can just talk, converse with the internet, essentially, through your computer or your phone, and it can do things for you, not just find web pages, but actually execute things like get me a dinner reservation or get me two tickets to the Cubs game on Saturday, or there's nothing like that. That generally took a long time, was very inefficient at that time to actually find a way to do a lot of these things. And we thought, since talking is about 7 times faster than typing, and it comes naturally to us all, no instruction manual required, that would be the next big thing. And that was kind of where we started.
So exciting. And you're in the prospect of building a company. What was your first, I don't know if I want to call it a commercial launch, but what was your first public facing launch? Was it in the Apple iStore? iStore, I'm trying to think even what it was called back then, the App Store, or was
Yeah.
it somewhere else?
Early on in my career, I did another company around telecom as well.
Mm-hmm.
But and I also launched several. So I've been in the mobile business, the mobile phone business, and creating services that take it beyond the utility of just making phone calls or you know text messaging. Everybody knew that it was going to be sort of the center, the remote control for your life, so to speak. So I've been doing that since before the first bubble, so since the late '90s. Um, yeah, so we just started, back in that day, um, working on services, and before there were even color displays on mobile devices, which tells you how far back that is. Um, but yeah, from that point on, we wanted to use the phone as kind of a remote control for your life using your voice.
So you were operating as a startup, I guess. You had gotten funding, I presume. You're planning to launch this as an independent company, and somewhere along the way, Apple and Steve Jobs became interested in Siri. Can you talk a little bit about that
Yeah,
and what your interactions were like and how you made a decision to move forward with your
sure.
business with Apple?
Yeah, so most people don't know that Siri began in the world as an app, regular old app on the App Store. And we launched that in 2010 in February. And about 2.5 weeks later, I was walking out of the office going to lunch, and my biz dev guy came up to me and said, Apple's trying to reach you. Scott Forstall is his name, and people living in the Valley at that time knew he was the guy who invented iOS and was the head software guy at Apple. So I said, okay, yeah, give him my number. I'm happy to talk to him. So, that could be interesting. And lo and behold, 30 seconds later, my phone started ringing and I saw it was from Cupertino. And I picked it up and I heard a voice say, "Is this Dag?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, this is Steve Jobs." And I was like, "Whoa, um, how you doing, Steve?" And we had a nice conversation. He basically called to say, "Look, we love what you're doing and would love to talk to you more about, potentially working together on it. And, can you come over to my house tomorrow?" And I said, "Actually, I'm taking my wife to the ballet," which was true. Most people don't believe me that I said I couldn't make it. But he said, "Oh, well, we'll try for something a little bit earlier." And of course, I expected an hour or two later some admin to call me up and say, "Mr. Jobs is available, tomorrow at 1." He called again personally and said, "Hey, I found a better time." So, he's like literally giving me directions to his house, turn by turn. You take her right here, and then I just found it interesting, kind of an early conversation with him. So we ended up going over there, myself and my founders, the next day, and uh, kind of just popped our feet up on his coffee table in front of a raging fire. And for 3 hours, he convinced us that Apple was going to win the smartphone wars, and basically had a long discussions around how Siri could be a big part of that.
Shoes on or shoes off?
Shoes off.
Okay.
Shoes off. It was kind of a rickety little coffee table that you felt like was about to fall over. Um, but yeah, that was a really interesting conversation. And then he called me the next day and said, "Look, we're really interested in working together with you guys. Would you be willing to throw in?" He called it throwing in together.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, so that means acquire in Apple
Okay.
parlance. And um, yeah, so we started dancing around. We had just raised money, so we weren't in any hurry. We thought this was going to be the next Google, and so we earnestly were not interested in selling the company. But he persisted and ended up calling me 34 days in a row. He's calling me at midnight. Kept raising the price, and essentially guaranteeing us that their commitment was going to be, this project would be one of Apple's top two priorities. And ultimately, we decided to make the move. So, but it was a really interesting process of back and forth, and convincing us, and then convincing our board who didn't want to do it, and so on and so forth.
And it sounds like Steve is a very eccentric, or was a very eccentric individual. I've read his biographies, and I'm sure a lot of people listening are interested in how he works. How did he react to the name? Because Siri is a pretty unconventional name for an Apple product.
Yeah, well, we debated on the name for 18 months. Apple generally would never use the name of a company it acquires in their products. They they have their own naming conventions. But, after 18 months of really them trying to come up with a better name, and of course we already owned all the copyrights to that name and the URLs and everything else, they just couldn't come up with something better. And probably about a month or two before we launched, I got the word finally that actually they were going to keep the name. And of course, that was very exciting for us because we named it. It had a special meaning to us. It sort of guaranteed the legacy of kind of how this thing started. And we just loved the name in general. And we thought it fit very well. And ultimately, Steve decided to stick with it. So we were very happy about that.
What was his idea for the name? Did he have one?
Yeah, so he wanted to call it Apple Talk, which we thought was awful, and basically ignored him when he told us to change it, which a guy like him isn't used to. But the idea of this product and this concept was that it feels human-like. It's an anthropomorphic persona that's sort of the ghost in the machine in your phone that makes it feel personal, makes it feel human-ish, and that you speak to it, the way you would to another person. So we thought it should have a name that essentially was a name of some sort of living thing, and it wasn't a male or a female. Siri, most people think Siri is a female, but we deliberately made the persona to be genderless. And we wrote, and the interesting part about how the thing that made Siri take off when it was launched originally was that we didn't anticipate that until about 2 or 3 months before the launch, which was, wow, people are going to ask a bunch of funny questions to this thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our idea was, well, it's going to make it very easy to help you get stuff done. Book the table, buy the tickets, things that generally would take a ton of clicks on the internet. That was the concept. But we're like, well, let's let's build this persona. Let's, give a little backstory to Siri where, Siri's actually not of this earth, isn't a man or woman, is vaguely aware of pop culture, has a dry sense of humor. And we just ran with that and ended up spending, a lot of time right at the end making Siri kind of the funny, witty thing that it turned into. And that was the thing that actually resonated with people, in the Apple launch eventually. So I remember I actually left one day after the Apple launch. Steve died, and I decided to leave the company. And I was in San Diego, just exhausted after this run up to the launch, laying in a hotel room, and I just flipped on the TV, and Jay Leno popped on, and he did a whole 10-minute thing on Siri the day after the Apple launch, and I was just going, what? And yeah, and it turns out that the thing people were resonating with was all of the wit and how it felt, how it was funny and how it was witty. Nothing to do with all the original stuff that we spent most of the time on, which was like the productivity part and helping you get things done. The focus was all about how you could talk to your phone and it would tell you jokes, and it was really funny, and it was, so that part of it took off in a way that made it sort of a cultural phenomenon over just a feature on a phone. And to this day, that's what people basically resonate with, is the fact that Siri's funny and it does a bunch of funny things, and can help you get some things done as well. But but what most people talk about is, oh, did you do this one? Did you ask Siri that?
Right. Yeah.
So,
in fact, I heard you talking to my colleague Paul and telling a story about maybe some unexpected answers to questions, where Siri might help you if you committed a crime. If you don't mind telling that story.
Yeah. So, we have a kind of a funny culture in our company. And, if some of your listeners, many of them probably know the term Easter egg, which is essentially a bunch of engineers putting in something like Siri, a bunch of questions that nobody knows about, that only we knew about, that had funny answers, kind of, So we had a series of things that we kind of put in there just for fun. One of them was, you know, where can I bury a dead body? And what Siri would do if you asked that question was literally pop up a thing. It would geolocate where you are, and it would pop up a list. It would say, well, do you want nearest swamps, metal foundries? How do you want to dispose of this body? Um, all of a joke, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing about launching something like this at the scale of Apple is that when you have, a billion people using this, inevitably, and some years ago, it turns out that some guy killed his roommate and literally asked Siri where to bury that body, um, and literally followed the turn-by-turn directions and dumped the body where Siri had kind of led him to. And fortunately, um, law enforcement actually used the fact that that this perpetrator was using Siri to track back and find out who it was. So Siri actually helped him solve the crime, which was great.
Wow, that
And
is a
as
truly incredible
also
story.
subsequently, there's another use case that was completely unexpected that I've gotten letters about. I've personally have, people have reached out to me, found me somehow just to thank me about this stuff, and my co-founders. Um, and that is people that get in car accidents. So I can't
Mm.
tell you how many people have driven their car off the road, been seriously injured. Their car is like upside down in a river, and they can't reach their phone. They can't get out of their car. They can't get to their seatbelt. And they literally say, "Hey Siri, call 911."
Mm-hmm.
And they're able to describe roughly where they are. And there have been literally dozens of those kinds of cases where Siri has saved lives because people were incapacitated and could call out to their phone and have it call 911. So that was another case where totally unexpected use case that we hadn't really thought of, and people just cleverly thought, "Wow, maybe I can do that," and it worked.
Another incredible story. And you speak of saving lives. I actually think it's a great time to talk about your current company, Dog. Why did you decide to move into healthcare? And I understand there was a personal story that happened to you
Right.
that was unexpected. Maybe you would never plan on going into healthcare in the first place.
Yeah, I mean that's quite a leap for people that know how hard it is to. My whole career has been disrupting things and inventing new things and kind of changing the norm. And healthcare is one of the hardest places to do that. Normally, I'd probably run away from that because I know it's hard. I just don't know that space very well. But one week after I sold my second company called Viv to Samsung, I just went in for, my wife kind of said, "Hey, when's the last time you went to the doctor?" I said, "I don't know, 7, 8 years ago." She said, "Well, I set you up for this executive health exam." I said, "Well, great, let's go." And at the other end of that, they said, "You're in great shape, except for that large lemon sized tumor on your pancreas."
Jeez.
And of course, that was a huge shocker. The irony is, it was the exact same type of cancer that killed my former boss, Steve Jobs, which was a very rare form of pancreatic cancer called neuroendocrine. I would say if you're going to get pancreatic cancer, that is the one to get. The other one called adenocarcinoma is even more deadly, but this one is obviously very dangerous as well, as it did take Steve's life. So I went through this crazy health scare, a big surgery, and just came out the other end saying, having spent a lot of time in that environment, saying, wow, there's a lot of places here that we could probably make an impact, make it easier to engage with the healthcare system. And I had spent a lot of time, like, kind of during that first COVID summer, trying to figure out, what's the best idea? What should I go for? And I ended up having dinner with one of my first investors in Siri. But tell him I'm interested in the space, but I don't have the one thing that I like to have when I start a company, and that's some technological breakthrough that creates a game-changing paradigm or opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Oh, you have to meet this guy. His name is Tuin. He's literally in a garage right now. We're funding him. We just funded him for $2.5 million, but he's building this blood pressure measurement system using only your mobile phone." So I had a first call with him, which lasted about half an hour, and he's like explaining it to me. I'm like, that's how you open up the app and you put your finger over the camera and it measures your blood pressure. And I thought, that's neat, but I didn't grasp what the real potential impact of that could be. So we talked about a week later, and that call was about 7 hours. I literally had to recharge my phone while we were on the call because I was finally grasping, the potential impact that something as simple as moving away from a blood pressure cuff to using a device that everyone in the world almost has to manage something like high blood pressure. And, for those of you that don't know, high blood pressure is the number one health issue in the world. Half of every adult American has it. Only about 25% of them have it under control. And just to tell you how crazy it is, they call it the silent killer because you don't feel bad. You don't feel anything until you're having a stroke or until you're having a heart attack. So it's a hard thing to get people to actually realize is really dangerous. Um, so yeah, I realized at that point that if we could make this work, we could get FDA approval for it. We could completely change how the number one health issue in the world is treated. Make it far easier. Adherence rates go way up because it's just super simple to do. It takes about 30 seconds a day. And that's what we're building. So, our hope is that we can, 5 years down the road, I don't know if you remember the old McDonald's signs where it says, 50 billion served,
Right.
on the big
I remember.
kind of McDonald's signs out front. We want that to be 50 million lives saved and heart attacks prevented and strokes prevented. And, we're very confident in the fact that this is going to be one of the biggest and most visible changes to healthcare and cardiovascular care that's ever come around. So we're very excited about it.
Well, when I go for my annual checkup, it didn't really resonate with me until now. Is I'm waiting for the doctor, and someone comes in and takes my blood pressure, and then 15 minutes later, when the doctor comes in, he takes my blood pressure again, and I said, why do you do that? And he said, well, actually, because I want to know what your blood pressure is after you've been sitting down for 10 or 15 minutes, because after you've been walking around and come in the office, it's going to be different. And I'm just thinking, wow, this is where we are with blood pressure.
Yeah, well, let me give you a couple more things that will astound you even more. So a lot of people that go in, something like 20% of people that are in the doctor's office have something called white coat syndrome, where they're nervous, they're in a doctor's office, and that artificially increases their blood pressure, so they get diagnosed with blood pressure when they don't actually have it.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
there's an equal chance that you're there and that you're feeling like, oh, I'm in a medical professional environment and I'm relaxed, and that depresses your blood pressure. So, what we call the annual doctor visit, like a state in time visit. You get one reading once a year, and they draw all these conclusions from it, and that's kind of the way that they do it.
Dog, so how much data do you think you can collect versus what's actually available now in terms of understanding blood pressure? We were talking
Yeah.
off camera about how my my daughter has type 1 diabetes, and she now has something that she wears which monitors her blood sugar all the time.
Yep.
And so that's just catapulted the amount of information we have on blood sugar. What are we talking about? Are we talking about like 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 x more data here?
Well, John, you're hitting on one of the key um, differentiators, and one of the most important aspects of what we're doing is this data collection. So, as you described yourself, you go in the doctor's office, they put a blood pressure cuff on you, they roll their chair over to the you know, electronic health record and manually input a number. That's all the data they have. So you know, we're talking about the number one health issue in the world, and there's nearly no data about what works, what doesn't in terms of demographics, genetic influence of which drugs to use, dosages, lifestyle changes. Look at all of those variables and say, well, which combination is right for you? And the answer is nobody has a clue. So we are, simultaneously capturing, and I mean, the average user takes about 5 measurements a day. So we're
Hmm.
getting heart rate variation, blood pressure. We're adding pulse ox, so the amount of oxygen in your blood, and we're going to be doing a few other cardiovascular things. But all different times a day, we have all this associated metadata around, your other vital signs simultaneously. We're watching remotely, through our system, through this app on your phone. We can watch when we send you a new set of meds. We can see immediately how they're affecting you, how your heart rate is, how it's affecting your blood pressure day to day. Right. This is the advantage of what I call mobile disease management. Your phone's with you all the time. We're getting a bunch of input from you, biosensor stuff through your finger and taking this measurement for your blood pressure. We're gathering. I mean, you said 100x, 10,000x. I mean, we're starting from almost zero. So
Hmm.
there's a single, very very basic. It's like a flow chart that has about you know 25 different elements to it called JNC8, which is essentially the standard for how you treat blood pressure. But it's almost like opening up a book that has a cover that says "Treating Blood Pressure for Dummies." It's like you open it up. It's like, well, are they most? The thing they look at is, well, do you anticipate that this person will actually remember to take twice a day or just once a day? And that's really the extent to which they figure out which meds you should use.
Wow.
Now, we use a whole variety of things. We're going to be watching, which medications and dosages work for, an African American woman who's between the ages of 55 and 60, who has this blood pressure type, this genetic profile, um, this type of lifestyle, um, which lifestyle changes are working and aren't working. So we will certainly be completely rewriting how hypertension gets treated as we get years worth of data, and it's going to be a deluge. I hired some of the old band from Siri and Viv, my artificial intelligence companies. They were the first hires I made, knowing that we would gonna get a bunch of data here,
Hmm.
and we would be able to get so good at managing this number one disease that in a few years, no one's going to be able to do it as good as we are. And that's not, a competitive thing because we're going to be giving a lot of this away to the world. But, in 3 years from now, trying to be as good as we are at managing blood pressure is going to be like trying to start a search engine that's as good as Google without any data.
It's
Um, so, ultimately, when we have the data, you will see me on TV on Good Morning America and CNBC and everywhere else I can get on, saying, guys, if you don't use this app for high blood pressure, you're killing people, and it's probably nearing unethical because it's just so much more effective We get people under control 20 times faster. And just to give you a stunning statistic, people, you know, the normal way that doctors sort of diagnose somebody with high blood pressure, um, they don't really scare them enough. They don't succeed at convincing them that this is something that they really, really need to take seriously. And I'll give you one statistic that proves it. 25% of people that get diagnosed with high blood pressure and get prescribed a medication never fill that prescription.
Oh my
Okay,
gosh.
1 out of 4 won't even fill the prescription. They're like, I feel fine. I don't know what they're talking about. They're just worried about nothing. But once you look into what high blood pressure does to your body, it is just evil. Basically, the definition of high blood pressure is your heart is getting damaged because it's harder to get the blood through your body. So A, you're damaging your heart. B, you're putting a lot of pressure on your arterial system, your veins and your arteries. It's literally causing micro tears. And the thing that I've found, not being a doctor myself, is that those little tears that the blood is making on the arterial walls, that's where all the cholesterol builds up. Literally, as it's going down the arterial trees, it's getting caught on those little tears. So that's where things start accumulating.
Wow.
Blockage starts. High blood pressure is just the bane, and it's the beginning of a lot of really bad things in your body. So I learned a lot about that, and you realize how even minor changes, say bringing your blood pressure from 140 down to 120, a minimal change like that is very impactful on the likelihood of getting a stroke or having a heart attack. So, all of that summed up, um, you know, we're at Riva. We're just trying to make it easier to do this, to keep track of it, to treat it, and hopefully save a whole lot of heart attacks and lives in the process.
Thanks, Dag. Such a great story, and I wish you the best on the product launch for all of our sakes. What's the status of the launch? I understand you can sign up as a user for a beta. Are there any requirements for doing so?
Well, you need to be hypertensive. So right now, that means if you have a blood pressure of 140 systolic or higher, we are happy to get you engaged and involved. We are submitting to FDA for approval on the accuracy of our sensor that we use in mobile devices, and that process takes about 6 months. So, we're looking at end of year or Q1 next year before you'll hear a lot more about this.
All right. Awesome. I love it. Thanks so much, Dag. Great to talk to you
Yeah, you're
today.
welcome, John. Yeah, likewise.